In 1931, Universal released Frankenstein, directed by James Whale, one of the best American movies of the time. Even 92 years later, the story and craft hold up extremely well. Despite being good, general audiences loved it, and it was a huge hit at the box office, so naturally the studio milked it for everything it was worth, releasing Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, Frankenstein meets Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, which is basically the monster Avengers, and semi-finally an appearance in House of Dracula. Meanwhile, they were also releasing all of this at varying degrees of quality. What, you thought studios making unnecessary sequels and crossovers instead of original stories was a Mon thing? These sequels didn't need to exist. The first movie ended pretty definitively with almost everyone living happily ever after, so continuing the story, even with the same director, could risk damaging it. And yet, Bride of Frankenstein was nothing short of phenomenal and arguably surpassed the original. A reason for this is because it expanded on the original's characters and themes, particularly the monster, who was already great, but now I can comfortably call him one of the most compelling characters I've ever seen in a movie. It also didn't fall into the trap of feeling tacked on. It feels like a natural progression of the story, so much so that it's hard to imagine the first without it, which is especially impressive as the previous one ended with the monster dying. It also gave us this! Good. Which we as a society are better for having. No, but seriously, this is one of the best scenes in the franchise. You know what, let's make a checklist of all the reasons Bride of Frankenstein works so well, just for fun. Alright, now let's look at how many of these the sequels did. After Bride, there's a noticeable decline in quality as the series strayed away from what made the first two so great, likely because afterwards the films were handed over to different directors. This was started by Son of Frankenstein, directed by Rowland V, which disregarded continuity to tell its own story. This would be a problem if it was made today, but back then they had different standards due to the different ways movies were consumed. So to be fair, I will mostly be judging the film for the execution of the changes instead of the fact that it changed things at all. Let's start with a positive. As I said in my checklist, the visuals are better than the previous films, which were already great. This is largely thanks to the complete overhaul of the locations. In the original, Frankenstein's castle was meant to contrast his lab. His lab was where he worked and committed crimes against nature, so it was dark and dreary, whilst his castle was where he lived and hid from those crimes, so it was warm and cosy. But since then, the Frankenstein name has been tarnished by the monster.
His name has become synonymous with horror and monsters. Why, 9 out of 10 people call that misshapen creature of my father's experiments Frankenstein.
So the barrier between his work and personal life is looser, with the castle reflecting that. What used to be a pleasant place to live is now larger and emptier, with fewer signs of comfort. It emphasises how this is no longer a place to escape to from evil, it's an evil place to escape from. Of course, the purpose of the visuals is to enhance the writing, so now let's look at the changes that didn't work so well. In the first movie, the monster essentially has the mind of a newborn. He's a blank piece of clay who's moulded by the world around him. Because of his unnatural birth, freakish appearance, and primitive actions, the characters are heavily biased against him. This bias is then validated when the monster begins to kill people. But these attacks aren't random outbursts. He starts just trying to defend himself, and when he's punished for doing so, he lashes out. When he's finally shown kindness, he reciprocates it, and when he knows he's done something wrong, he feels upset about it. What's more, he's not stupid. He was literally born yesterday, and the closest thing he has to a father figure abandoned him, so he just hasn't been given the time or means to learn anything. When he makes a new friend, he accidentally kills her whilst playing, because he doesn't know any better, and when people come after him, since he can't talk, he can't verbally defend himself. So although he's done horrible things, they're not entirely his fault, and he himself is a victim. Bride of Frankenstein expands on these ideas, and even goes a step forward by exploring the monster's loneliness, by having him desperately try to make a friend. First peacefully, then through force, with both going horribly wrong. The film ends with him deciding that he belongs dead, which is ridiculous because despite what I and the movie have been calling him, he's not a monster. He is a thinking, feeling human being. The film even makes him more human by having him learn to speak. But after everything the world's done to him, I can't blame him for thinking otherwise. In Son of Frankenstein, he's much less compelling, because up until the end he doesn't have much agency, being little more than a weapon for the film's antagonist Igor. But even when Igor dies and he becomes more independent, he doesn't get much better, as it's hard to get invested in such a bland character. In this film, he reverts to how he was in the first movie. Almost. He's slower and only communicates through grunts and growls, but unlike the first movie where he displays a wide range of emotions, here he's either angry or just kind of there. There are two scenes where he shows any other emotion, his first scene and the scene where he finds his only friend's body. That's it. The monster has a death scene in each movie, and they're pretty emblematic of how it approaches the character. In the first two, it's tragic, but here it's triumphant. The monster isn't a human, it's a beast that needs to be put down. And you know what? That's fine. That is a perfectly acceptable direction to take a character. Solid 6 out of 10, good job. But when compared to how interesting he could have been, he's a massive disappointment. That said, although the monster's what the story revolves around, it has a lot else to offer. The film has plenty of characters who, whilst not as thematically rich as the previous entries, are still a lot of fun. And if fun's all you want, then this is arguably the best film for that. There are 3 central characters, representing 3 different groups with their own motivations, and they are in one way or another going against each other. On one end, there's Inspector Crow. Of the trio, he's easily the most moral character in the film, as he just wants what's best for everyone. As a police inspector, his priority is protecting the town, but he isn't a slave to their whims. He's willing to push back on them when he disagrees with their judgment. The town makes it clear to the Frankensteins that they don't like them, and are uninterested in being friends with them, due to the sins of Wolf's father. Crow, on the other hand, isn't so quick to judge, criticising the villagers for their obvious bias, promising Wolf his protection and even having tea and dinner with his family, all despite him suffering the most at the hands of the monster. On the other side of the scale is Igor, a vengeful psychopath with purely selfish motivations. His goals in the film are to control the extremely powerful monster and use him to kill the people who wronged him. Before the events of the film, he was a criminal who was hanged for grave robbing, but somehow returned from the dead. And due to a technicality, instead of being locked up or killed again, the villagers just let him roam free, which is... okay, whatever movie. And in the middle is our lead, Wolf Frankenstein. If I were to define his character by one motivation, it would be to protect his family, which on the most basic level manifests in a desire to keep his wife and son safe. But it's also what drives him to revive the monster, as he wants to protect his father and family name, and believes the best way to do that is by proving his father was right, which is what puts his family in danger. It also puts him at odds with Igor and Inspector Crow, as Igor wants the monster to himself, and Crow obviously doesn't want that murderous beast running around, which creates a fun dynamic where Wolf is trapped between a rock and a hard place. He's indirectly responsible for the deaths of innocent people, and if he does nothing, more will die, and eventually their deaths could be traced back to him, but he can't stop Igor and the monster alone, and he's trying to hide his crimes from the one person who can help him. Unfortunately, the resolution is straightforward and rushed. Wolf catches Igor alone and kills him, which creates an interesting scenario where the monster, grief-struck and guideless, is much less predictable, and kidnaps Wolf's son, but Wolf and Crow just team up and kill it. The film fades to the Frankensteins leaving on the train, and that's it. That's the ending. And it's bad. I think Igor's death is pretty good, as although it's quick, it's given more weight when the monster finds his dead body. But the monster's death is just anticlimactic. Wolf walks into the room, knocks it into the sofa pit, and then we're shown wide shots of the creature just in there. Personally, I would have gone for a close-up or two, so it would feel more personal. After all, Wolf should have some kind of emotional attachment to the creature, as he's responsible for bringing it back from the dead. Speaking of which, it's cool that he stopped the monster, but wouldn't all this validate the villagers' fears and make them hate him more? And why isn't he being held at least partially responsible for the murders? The villagers shouldn't be cheering him goodbye, they should be chasing him out. Maybe it's possible that Wolf could have whipped up some kind of lie, or maybe Crow could pity the Frankensteins and try to smooth things over after he explained himself and begged for forgiveness. But that absolutely should have been shown. Rushed endings is a problem with a lot of the Universal monster movies I've seen, especially the Frankenstein movies that came after this one, and my best guess at what caused them is time constraints, but some was half an hour longer than the first two, which didn't have this problem. The final scene in the original felt a bit too fast, but it still wrapped things up, and didn't leave the audience to fill in the essential gaps for themselves. With that said, it doesn't ruin the movie. It's just a very big annoying flaw in an otherwise great film. Alright, now let's talk about the other movies. Yeah, I'm just going to ignore that. In case it wasn't obvious, I have some rather strong feelings about the direction the series took, so I want time to prepare myself. Also, it's been like 3 months and I want to talk about stuff other than Frankenstein, so I've just added it to the list.